As Unitarians, we are not required to embrace a list of beliefs that is a creed. For us, the essence of being a church is being a community, a unity of spirit among each of the members, and a unity of spirit between the people of the church and God. We don't promise to believe, we promise to seek. We don't value the church for providing answers. We value it for being a place where we can question together. Our deepest joy comes from supporting each other on the journey. This is the theological statement of the Unitarian Congregation of Pernambuco in Recife, Brazil. And while our version might not have the word God in it, that statement sounds just like us, a community of questioners seeking spiritual meaning together. This morning is our last of 4 services on International Unitarian Universalism. We began with Reverend Brian Kiley back in January, speaking about his experiences as part of the International Council for Unitarian Universalists. Then I explored South Asian churches and their emphasis on singing and community and God. Last month, I looked at contemporary UUs in Europe with their serpent wisdom and dove gentleness. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the church in Brazil and then reflect on our global Unitarian and Universalist tradition. Unitarianism was brought to Brazil in the 1890s by 6 families immigrating from the United States, and that it included a Unitarian minister. And so they kept Unitarianism alive with informal teaching and services. And in another 20 years, more Unitarian families immigrated, they found each other, they made connections, they started building a community. And then finally in 1933, the Unitarian Church of Brazil was formally founded by the Reverend Charles Phelps. Since that time, it has been a leader in liberal values in Brazil. The first to ordain women in the 1940s, and they were the first to ordain an openly gay man in the late 1960s. They are outspoken supporters of human rights. They follow an Anglican-style liturgy, and they offer communion with each service, while also seeing the Bible as a collection of wisdom tales and social justice as a way to live by the example of Jesus. They see prayer as a human adventure, which is an image I really like, but might just be a Google Translate issue. Prayer as a human adventure. And I can see how Unitarianism there in Brazil, brought by Americans, has been mixed with the Catholicism of their history and created this blend of traditional worship rites and liberal theology. Just like our services are a blend of Protestant worship and liberal theology. Unitarianism adapts to the culture of each country where it grows. And in reviewing in the past few months all of our international faith companions, I've come to realize that here in Canada, with our sort of post-Christian, postmodern bent, that we're actually an outlier in the global tradition. I like to say we are at the forefront of our ever-evolving tradition, but it could be argued that we're just an outlier compared to the thousands and thousands of UUs in Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America who identify as progressive Christians. In the United States, where Unitarian Universalism is the largest sort of amount per capita of our denomination, it's a mix of God-focused congregations and humanist communities more like ours. And I think our way of worship might be the future of Unitarian and Universalism. And we might just be a steady outlier within this broader Christian tradition. Either way, we, like every UU community, are free to choose our path. And our path is now uncertain because the pandemic has changed the religious landscape, and we need to find our ways through this new terrain. I've been using that International Council of Unitarian Universalists as my resource for this series because I've never had the opportunity to engage internationally. Their conference was going to be in Montreal in the fall of 2020, and that was going to be my entry point. Another pandemic loss. But since that time, the ICUU has formally dissolved. Their farewell celebrations are this month. The ICUU, as well as the other global UU organization, which is the Partner Church Council, which linked North American congregations with congregations elsewhere, they've made the decision to shut down in order to allow a new international organization to arise. Both the ICUU and the Partner Church recognize that much of the way they operated came out of a colonial mindset that made it hard to build healthy relationships across deep divides of wealth and status. And so these groups are being intentionally let go of this older way of doing things in order to begin anew and afresh. There's a leadership team planning, developing a way forward, beginning based on a vision for a broader, more inclusive and equitable partnership, which will offer opportunities for participation for those whose voices have often been excluded or unheard, and will address issues of power and money in healthy relationships. And I see this as a form of living our eighth principle, deconstructing those old structures in order to build new ones that are more inclusive. And I take hope from their courage of the people involved in this beloved organization who are able to let go of what they once were in order to let something new arise. While we are in absolutely no danger of closing our doors, I think it is time to wonder about what Canadian Unitarian Universalism looks like in a post-pandemic world. We haven't hit that post-pandemic world yet, but now is the time to ask the questions, to begin thinking about it. And questions are something we, as all UUs, are very good at posing. We don't value the church for providing answers. We value it for being a place where we can question together. Our deepest joy comes from supporting each other on the journey. So these international UU organizations are in the midst of a great transition, letting go to let something new arise. They didn't collapse, they weren't run into the ground. They just discerned that this way of being was no longer the right way to be, and it was time to release. And we do this all the time throughout our lives, we mortal beings who live in time. Parents letting their children go to make their own lives, moving from the school experience into beginning into workplaces, retiring from work into a new phase of being. All of these transitions aren't about things falling apart, but things ending as they should. It's that seasonal movement from flowering to fruiting to seeding. Think of the milkweed pod, a once common sight in Southern Ontario, and the only food for monarch butterflies here, so please cultivate them if you have a place to plant. Milkweed pods are long, pale green pods. And when they open, they release hundreds of seeds embedded in fluff that float off on catch-on things. And I think this is a good image for transitions that come naturally, that there's a time to release the seeds and let them fall away. It's not an easy way to transition. Most of us like control too much to just let go and let the seeds fall. So sometimes we keep the pod tight shut, refusing to change. Sometimes we can't let the seeds go and we plant them intentionally in a place of our choosing. And if we water seeds and tend them and give them plenty of light and compost, that can work just fine. But sometimes the place we plant is not the right place for the seeds. And sometimes we just don't know where to plant the seeds, or we don't have the water or the light or the soil. So sometimes we just have to shake the pod and let the seeds go. What in your life might be ready to be released? Are you able to let go, to let the seeds fall without knowing what comes next? There is a kind of terrifying liberation in being able to let go without a plan. The seeds of a milkweed do no good staying inside the walls of a pod. They are only free to become milkweed in the dispersal. And of course, we all experience loss when things precious to us change, like a child leaving home or the end of a beloved job. And grief comes along with us, so does pain and anger and confusion. And not knowing, not having a plan is really hard in a society that prides itself on having answers. And it's easy to feel like a failure without a plan. But the milkweed way is a different way to be in the world. It says, just let go and see what happens. It says, trust that what needs to happen next will happen when it's time. That seeds will sprout when the conditions are right. So this is both terrifying and a liberating way to be, to trust that things can simply unfold and will. And this is not to say that plans are not a good thing. For practical things like a dinner party or building a car, I am all for excellent planning. But for life changes, for spiritual choices, we can move forward without the plan being all worked out. In the international world, there's a team developing this new organization, and they will create a plan, but first they're just taking time for discernment. They're not rushing to begin. Here in Canada, the pandemic has accelerated what is the growing decline in churches. Not because people are seeking the spiritual any less, but because many of our formats, like this Protestant style, doesn't work so well anymore. Upcoming generations can find spiritual meaning in a TikTok video or a sunset. They find power in travel and conversation. They can follow spiritual mentors on YouTube or through a podcast. And many of them don't want to be confined or identified by one religious tradition. They take from all to find what they need. Many are also seeking community, which is something we're good at being, a spiritual community that offers a home for seekers. And more like that too, we take from different traditions. We're creating this new thing together. So what and where can we meet these new generations who want to have deeper conversations about ethics and being, who want some kind of ritual and ceremony? What do we need to let go of to get to that place of meeting? I think these are the questions we need to be asking. And I don't think we can just identify a strategy and make a plan and follow it and succeed. And I've wanted to do this. I like doing planning. And I've been seeking answers, the right way to shift, and I haven't found anything I can bring you. And it's been a little exhausting and a little disheartening, till I finally came to realize that trying to be right doesn't work in a spiritual community in these times of transition. It's not a helpful approach. So seeing the international UU community taking a willing leap of faith into the future, not knowing what comes next, has been a blessing. And this is the UU way of doing things after all, in community and in conversation. So as we head into that not so far distant post-pandemic future, we too will need to find that liberation of not knowing, the liberation of waiting and seeing, the liberation of asking instead of answering, of being, not being right, just being. I think it's going to look a lot like talking and wondering and sharing meals and talking and wondering some more. It's going to look a lot like sending seeds out and seeing where they land and which ones sprout. And if we can see this time to come as a liberation, not as a source of panic, then we will grow into that spiritual community that generations to come so need. One that welcomes them in all the fullness of their complex selves, that embraces the many facets of their lives, that supports them in their search. We don't value the church for providing answers. We value it for being a place where we can question together. Our deepest joy comes from supporting each other on our journey. So say we all.